Hey everyone, welcome back to the ScholarAI Founders Pod. Remember to catch us on all the typical podcast locations and find us on our YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us today. Lakshay, I know there's some news out of India that you wanted to call some attention to, so I'm going to tee the floor up for you.
Yeah, so obviously we're in the space of startups and business and entrepreneurship, and there's a lot of people who've kind of set up the pillars for a lot of other people's success. And India just lost like a really, really incredible entrepreneur. So Ratan Tata, for those who aren't aware and listening, he was kind of like India's, I guess, like Jeff Bezos equivalent, like made a mega conglomerate, like set up the car industry, moved India forward like to a very, very severe capacity technologically. And not only was he like a very highly impactful entrepreneur, like he clearly made a very, very big difference to a country as it was developing. But he was also just like a really good human, like cared very deeply about entrepreneurs around him, very, very humble. There's stories of like him being an entrepreneur for the first time, just like interested in VC capital. And he was still like, he'd be 5 minutes late and be like profusely apologizing, like no ego, despite like everything he had done, no hubris about him. Just a really, really humble, kind of incredible, like person that happened to make a really, really big difference to like a country and moved it forward, whether it was in like the automobiles industry, smartphones, software. So I just wanted to kind of like lead with that because obviously like when we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about a lot of innovation and all that sort of stuff that's built on the shoulders of a lot of giants. I know speaking for myself, being Indian, like I know like Tata cars were like everything that gets driven in India for a very, very long time. Um, so just wanted to open with that. Very, very impactful, obviously, a very big loss for the country and just the world in general. But lots of precedent, I suppose, for what entrepreneurship is like for more and more leaders as we continue to have more and more interesting characters in front of us doing really, really interesting things.
We all benefit from having these big figures in the world, especially in tech and entrepreneurship. They set the beacon, the signal for what all of us can kind of strive to achieve. And so it's a sad loss that Ratan Tata passed away, but also it's a wonderful legacy for all of us to aspire to. And so I think it's a great moment to honor him and people like that. And perhaps in connection, Elon's another person who's got a great legacy, has done a lot of things globally that sets a standard for other people. Elon's had quite a week or two here. Want to transition over to that. Damon, what's your reaction to Elon's legacy?
Yeah, I find it difficult at times to talk about Elon because on one hand, I think that he's somewhat immeasurable in kind of his raw output and the kind of agency he can give to other people to accomplish these really great things. Like on the one hand, we have him somewhat leading the autonomous charge in Tesla, and I think there's reasonable debate around whether or not the timelines forecasted in the We Robot, event, if you will, are going to be met given the history of Tesla missing deadlines. But I think independent of whether or not the deadline's perfectly accurate or not, I just find it constantly inspiring some of the work that he does around pushing innovation forward. I think that SpaceX, obviously catching the rocket and this idea of reusable rockets now kind of being in the public forefront because of the efforts and, um, you know, ambition, I think, of Elon Musk is it just simply can't be overstated. And then, transitioning a little bit to kind of some other disaster that have been felt across the country. Living in North Carolina, we've seen Western North Carolina ravaged by hurricanes and kind of the effects of Hurricane Helene. And uh, for all intents and purposes, Starlink has been a necessary disaster relief in that, right? Connecting people, making sure people can get the help they need. And that is another kind of product of Elon's work output, right? And his kind of inspirational company building and that kind of thing. And so I think for all of Elon's fault, I think it takes a little bit of a contrarian personality. And I think it takes someone who is not afraid to push the envelope to be able to do some of the things that he has done. And circling back to Lakshay's point earliest in this conversation, I think that there are few individuals who move the world forward in a net positive way on all fronts. And I don't necessarily think that Elon is that person always, but I think it would be unreasonable to think that he hasn't been net positive, especially for the world of innovation across many sectors, automotive, possibly interplanetary existence, habitation, whatever you want to call it, and now disaster relief. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made, not to segue too hard here, but that Starlink in and of itself would be one of the most valuable private companies in the world, and it's kind of a subsidiary of SpaceX. And so I think that's kind of where I leave it. So, look, I'll kick it back to you. Any closing thoughts on that or anything on Elon?
Yeah, I think I like everything Elon does. I don't like everything he says, which is the unfortunate, like, I guess, package you kind of get with him. But like, I don't know. I know, especially like young liberal myself, like I'm generally surrounded by a lot of people who are very, very anti Elon, and like I totally get it. And he says a lot of really crazy things in general. I can't like align with him fully as like a personality, but like every time I'm talking with my buddies about just like who Elon is as a person, like a lot of people like to poke holes. Like a lot of people like to just like pick out a flaw and like make that the whole person. But I think like you can't look at Elon and not see like a repeated history of success over and over and over in making very, very highly impactful, like industry shifting things work, right? When 700 other people have tried the same concept, he's the one who happens to make a like an implementation or a operation that gets the job done. And of course, it comes with packages, but ultimately, like he's very successful. And like, I mean, of all of the technologists and like the big wigs out there in the world, he's one of the few people who's willing to like back his convictions and put his reputation on the line over and over again to make those convictions real. Like I think like of all of like the Meta, like Google, like whatever of the world, like very few of them have like an earnest interest in like humanity progressing technology. Elon continues to like make moonshots priority number one. And of course, like to make moonshots work, you have to do like more proper investment in like more boring things. But he never loses the moonshot. And I think that's like constantly awe-inspiring, right? The fact that we get a video every couple of years of like a rocket doing something absolutely insane. The fact that Neuralink is able to make people walk again is incredible, right? And they're just like, again, he's a package of a human being. I mean, not everyone is super one-dimensional, but you can't, like, I look at people like Ratan Tata, I look at people like Elon, and like, to me, like, just pure inspiration more than anything.
Yeah, as I said earlier with Ratan Tata, Elon is a gift to humanity. We will move forward as a species because of people singular talent like that. And just to summarize the last couple of weeks of Elon's successes, Starship executed its fifth test launch, its test flight, and the Starship rocket was caught by the catching mechanism that moved mass from the rocket to the ground. That was the objective, the super heavy booster. And that had never been done before by any kind of mechanical arms or anything else. All of that mass had previously been on the rocket. It was a daring, almost crazy idea, but has shown what's possible. I think that's what will move humanity forward, is daring attempts to show what's possible and then actually achieving them. And Elon's just incredible. He's a standard setter when it comes to that. They also had the Tesla announcement of the RoboTaxis and the RoboVan. The RoboTaxis had kind of falcon wing style doors that came up. The demo version of the RoboTaxi was a two-seater, I believe, and the RoboVan, I believe, is a Model 20-seater. These are all essentially mock-ups. You know, for those of us kind of in software, what they produced was actually like remote controlled, as my understanding for the most part. The Optimus robot that was presented was also being remotely controlled by operators. But all of this is to show kind of what's coming as foreshadowing of where the development cycle is leading toward. It's not immediately going to be available, but the idea of, and I'll pose the question to you, both on the RoboTaxi and on the Optimus, will you buy an Optimus for $20,000 if it's available and fully functional? Will you ride in a Tesla RoboTaxi, unpiloted, no driver.
I'm lucky in general to live in a area that's pretty safe, I guess. Like people don't drive really recklessly here. People are very polite on the roads. Like if they see like a civilian like 20 feet away from the corner of the sidewalk, they'll stop their car and wait for the civilian to cross in general. So I think circumstantially, like the idea of I have yet to be in the Waymo. I've been to San Francisco like 3 times in the last year, and I've yet to sit in the Waymo. But at least for my SF friends, I've heard generally pretty decent things. I would love for that to be real, and my experiences with Tesla's like full self driving so far has been pretty positive, all things considered. Um, I think like I think the thing I just haven't yet thought about, I guess, with a robotaxi is that like there's something about like even like an Uber or something like so let's say robotaxi I assume has Uber competitive prices, presumably a bit lower because of the like cost of the driver. Um, if robotaxi is there and Uber is also an option to me, I feel like it'd take me a while to say like I'm willing to drop like a 10 to 20 buck delta on the Uber to take a robo taxi instead. Like there's some level of like safety in just having that person present, I suppose. Um, I will also say like the robo van, I don't know who designed that thing. I am happy Elon likes taking creative liberties with his aesthetics, but that thing is super ugly to me. And I really hope that's not what the future ends up taking as design inspiration.
That's funny. I'll start with the design. I think a lot of the design is driven by aerodynamics. Truthfully, like I think a lot of it is just like how do we make this thing as efficient as possible, and so the design constraints are that. So I've also found that like I like the Tesla cars. I've never really liked the Tesla SUVs from purely a
Mhm.
design perspective, but like you see the Mercedes and they're also very rounded. So I think my only thought there is like I think the design is more informed by aerodynamic constraints than it is by it being something of pure beauty, which is, neither kind of here nor there. But the initial question of would I buy an Optimus or a autonomous car, basically, in short, yes to both. Now it comes with some obvious kind of if thens as far as what is the robot capable of, what kind of chores can it do, and that kind of thing. But the autonomous car, as far as commuting goes, I would like to be able to drive when I want to go on a drive or I want to actively engage. But as far as being able to work or sleep or have some sort of leisure in transit, that is as has always been an appealing idea to me. The idea of being productive in traffic when traffic arises is always something that I would be striving for, whether that be in the form of driver or driverless car. So I think in very short, the answer there is yes. And if you're telling me I don't have to dust the house or I find vacuuming cathartic, actually, as a slight tangent there, so I might keep that one. But other than that, if I could drop all the other chores to a robot that doesn't have to, eat or sleep, then I'm all for it. Yeah.
I I really shouldn't. Like this is a bad thing I'm about to say, but like there's some time that I was working on some stuff that we had going on, and like normally I like to work out of cafes. Like I just in general, I'm really much more productive in cafes versus at home. But there's this process I was running that was like a 20 like minute long like batch install thing. So I was like the cafe was closing. I had to go somewhere, so I just like walked out with my laptop open, like switched the hotspot. I just like put the laptop on the passenger seat while I was driving. I'm just getting home, just like looking right just to make sure that the wheel was still spinning on the thing I was running, which wasn't super great. I do think like one of my favorite forms of transit these days. I don't know what kind of conversation I'm starting right now. I really like trains. Trains have been really nice to like go up to Seattle or to get around it's like Vancouver or whatever. I've just thought it like I've been abandoning taking my SUV, like my kind of daily driver for like getting anywhere in the Pacific Northwest just for the sake of like if I'm in Seattle, like I have buddies there, like I'll just hop on a train, get that taken care of. Um, that leisure thing's huge. And especially if it's like it's coming at like a commodity price, that makes it much, much more enticing, I think, in general. Um, I also know, like, I think one thing that I have a question about is that, like, I don't know how they plan on doing this, but when you have a driver and you have someone who owns the car, they kind of take the responsibility for the pleasantness of the experience. But I've kind of just like lost trust in people using public goods respectfully. And so I don't know what their kind of plan is on like, yes, I understand that they'll have like self-charging docks or something that they're proposing, like the thing at park will be able to recharge battery. But I don't know how that looks like when like, well, if you just have some like mean, angry person like vandalizing the car, like who's responsible for that? Like, does the car just stay in rotation? How does the car know that? And maybe it's just as simple as like the Optimus robot is just like cleaning things or whatever, but it's not like you're trusting people to like self-report, trusting people to be on their best behavior in a fully automated system that is shared between many people, which in general to me feels like a recipe for not great things.
Yeah, interesting. There are all kinds of unknowns, but if it was a pure taxi service, I could see a lot of use cases for not paying attention. If it's an owned car service, if they're a car company still, not a taxi company, then the form factor I would want. I mean, ideally, like as a parent who drives kids all the time, I would love a kind of 5 to 6 seater format where I can be kind of actively engaged with children or not paying attention to like the same drive I do over and over and over, and let the car just do that and take that size group of people around. That would be hugely beneficial for me in terms of just like cognitive load, not paying attention, having more kind of bandwidth with the kids. So I could see that form factor really working. That's not what was presented, obviously, but something like that I would be happy to buy and own and keep at the house, not put in rotation, not make available to anybody else to use. So it's always with me, but I don't have to drive. That would work for me. Speaking of kind of form factor, I'm wondering what you think about the Cybertruck now that it's had most of a year, 6 months plus on the market. It's iconic. I get my thought process is it's iconic. It's clearly distinguished on the road. It still catches the eye. Maybe not in a positive way for some. For some, it's really interesting and cool still. I'm curious, kind of design aesthetic wise, what you think of the Cybertruck and what you think of it as a business.
My dad used to be like quite the Elon enthusiast in general. So like when Cybertruck was first announced, they created the option to put in like $100 like kind of pre-order sort of thing. We had one. And so we have like the opportunity to buy sitting right in front of us. So this would like hypothetically replace like what is my like 2004 like Toyota 4Runner daily drive. Like people have thrown up in that thing. People have like that thing has had like dirt all over it. Like skis have like gone through a window before. Like it's ready to be kind of mailed out. And I think like the place I've been inside of a Cybertruck through like a showroom, and like it's a pretty good car. Like I was then in regards to like just like functionality, I was pretty impressed. And as saying that as someone who's not a pickup driver in general, I have no reason to be using a pickup for most things. And I was just impressed that like it was very technology forward in general. Like I was pretty impressed with the specs. It didn't feel like too much of a compromise on like any of the things I'm used to. I will say of most people, like I know the main criticism design wise of it is that it kind of looks like just like a flat like fridge, basically. Like it's just like one flat brick. In general, I really like low polygon aesthetics. Like I wish it was a little bit more polygony, but that's just like a preference that has nothing to do with aerodynamics and capacity. I'm not super opposed to design. I think like with the correct like coloration, like correct kind of like wraps, you can make it look pretty good. I think that kind of like stainless steel look is a little like it just feels like a kitchen appliance after a certain color range. But yeah, I think if you put on a wrap, it looks better. I've seen like them driving around in my area. Like someone had one that was wrapped like fully black, and that one looked really good in my opinion. I think as a business, I don't think at the price range it currently sits at, I don't think it has like super large legs, but it does feel to me that like in service of creating a grander fleet of car ranges that sell for purposes, I could totally foresee like you can imagine in the future that like instead of Home Depot delivering like stuff to you in their own like random like one-off cargo trucks or something, you just order a Tesla like Cybertruck that is available in your area or something to go pick that up for you. It parks outside the Home Depot. Someone loads it up and it comes to your house and you just have to unload it yourself or something, right? Like it has its utility in the way that Elon seems to want the future to work. Like it is part of what I assume becomes a toolkit of autonomous vehicles that are able to like get things moved from one place to another.
Yeah, I feel similarly about the Cybertruck that I do about the Model Y and the Model X, and that it's not my preferred aesthetic for what it is compared against. Meaning, like the Model X is not my favorite, relatively full-sized SUV. The Model Y is not my favorite compact SUV, nor is the Cybertruck my favorite truck in the aesthetic. Even in the electric market, I think that just in a blind A/B test, I would prefer the visual presentation of the Rivian compared to the Cybertruck. That said, again, I think that Luce nailed it largely towards the end there, which is Elon needed a vehicle that could be operated autonomously, that could perform the functions of a truck. Any, civilian, any just public purchasing of the truck is another node in a data acquisition factory that is just Tesla sensors being on the road. And I think that in some ways the price point is a function more or less of the current EV market than it is of what it could ultimately be. I think we'll see prices of the Cybertruck, especially in more baseline models, reduce. It's never been clear to me how much of Tesla's business model is contingent on them selling a bunch of cars. Like if you just value them as a car company, they're significantly overvalued, and you would argue that none of the things they do make a lot of sense. But if you value them as a robot autonomy company in which some of their fleet is humanoid and some of their fleet is vehicles, then you have to have a truck. And then I think there's probably just some, eccentric design choices that were made in order to call attention to it and to inspire conversations like these. And so ultimately, I think it will be judged as neither a large failure nor a large success of Tesla, and instead just another anecdote en route to what Elon hopes to be a driverless future. There's one thing that I wanted to say that's a slight tangent to this, which is, and Lakshay referenced it earlier with the Waymo discussion. I was listening to some of the Waymo execs kind of speak about progress and expanding to different cities and kind of the way that they see it. And I just want to call attention to some of the words that they use. They don't describe themselves as building driverless cars. They describe it as building the ultimate driver. Meaning they're building a singular driver that can drive a singular vehicle better than anything else in the world. And they can do that at scale because they can replicate that because it's based on machinery and not a human input. And so I just thought that was a novel take on what is actually being done. But if you look at it through the prism of not building a bunch of things, but rather building a singularity of thing, meaning I am just building the best driver in the world, and the driver that is Tesla and the driver that is Waymo will compete to be the best driver in the world. I think that's an interesting thought proposition as well. Lakshay, it seems like you've got some thoughts to that.
Yeah, the thing that's always been weird to me with Waymo is like I've heard positive things about the general driver experience, but like it's so clear that like there was a chassis underneath that had to get like kind of like the innards rearranged and like resized and reconfigured to get the car working, right? And it's not like Waymo is a car production facility, right? Like it's not like what they're doing happens at scale right now. And I don't know, like I've never really thought about what the end game of Waymo really is. I don't know who I should check who the Waymo car chassis underneath. Like I don't know who actually built the base car. It's a Chrysler minivan. Like I don't know how that kind of operates at scale, because I mean I imagine that most of what they've built that's in SF and driving around, like all of those are pretty no scale in regards to how they've been constructed or built. Like it's not like they have a factory where that's printing out special Chryslers. So I don't know how that scales. I think like I can see a version in which like, okay, if you assume like who's competing for the RoboTaxi of the future, like at some point this Chrysler like Waymo like collaboration will extend into a production of a new line that has all the sensors all over it, has all the machinery all over it. Um, but that doesn't seem competitive. Like it feels by default behind, I guess. I say that without having thought about it too much. Like it just kind of occurred to me to think about like what Waymo does like 10 years from now. Um, but I do think that it's at least interesting. I think the whole like I know this comes up a lot with like Tesla and like engineering conversations about like, oh, you don't need LiDAR, you don't need radar, you just need vision, versus like the Waymos of the world that are very like, you need radar for everything, you need LiDAR for everything, because those are using sensors and inputs that humans don't have. I'm inclined to believe that just in general, like technology that gets adopted is technology that like orients around human behavior first. Like I think with LiDAR and radar, like yes, you can see more, but the world in general is set up for success for people who can see the way humans generally do. And so as we adapt stuff, like it's not like the way streets or traffic or the way like laws work will orient around like assume cars have LiDAR. They're going to assume for a long time that people who are or whatever intelligence is making decisions for what to do inside of a car is basing off of ears and eyes, right? So I think it's interesting, like it's an interesting conversation, but I don't see practically how Waymo like scales upwards in 5 years, especially given the like world adapting to car versus car adapting to world. Tesla's chosen a paradigm that like makes it human world friendly first. And that of course creates difficulties. Like I assume that their driving behavior is probably worse in some ways than Waymo's, but it's not the same thing as we have LiDAR, and that leads to things we need to dance around with how our car makes decisions on the road.
Have you seen the Rivian R3? I think we've talked about this before, but God, I really want one of these things. Or I'll screen share.
Yeah, we had the Rivian discussion. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think on the Rivian point, there's some interesting things as you're pulling that up to think about in terms of like they just sparked this recent deal with Volkswagen. There's obviously some progress there. I'm very curious to see how the electric vehicle market. Oh, there we go. Yeah, R3.
I love this thing, man. I really want one. It's like a little like I don't know. Looks fast, looks roomy, but agile. I can't wait to get one.
What's
That'll be
the
your
price range on it?
It's a future product, so I don't know.
Oh.
I don't recall what they said, but I think they said 2026, if I recall the timing.
Yeah, the R2s are expected soon, and the R3s will follow that as I remember it. But yeah, overall, I'm somewhat bullish on Rivian stock as a company. I do think there's going to be more than one winner in the EV market, and I think that legacy car manufacturers at worst will have to adopt some of the technologies that are being kind of developed by Tesla and Rivian and others. Lucid seems to be the one that I'm having the hardest time placing. I just can't figure out, whether or not I think that company is going to make it. Similar to Fisker, I think there are kind of equal parts good and bad arguments on either side of them making it or not making it. I'm wondering if either of you have thoughts on Lucid. That seems to be a fairly prominent EV manufacturer that no one really talks about.
I don't think they're going to have enough traction to make it. It just doesn't. I don't know. I don't think there's any chance.
They're losing the marketing game. I don't even know what their car looks like, to be honest.
Yeah, it's kind of a long boat tail. They've kind of gone after the like luxury sedan, BMW like 7 Series, Mercedes, S Class, that kind of thing. Very long kind of boat style sedans. They're very fast. Like they make a Lucid Air Sapphire version that I think may actually be the fastest EV on the market right now, 0 to 60 speed and that kind of thing, outpacing like the Tesla Model S Plaid and those kind of things. So, I think in certain circles, like we've seen a couple people that live not too far from us actually own one of the Lucid Airs, so I see it fairly regularly. And so we do see them often, but again, it's one of those things where just driving around, we see a bunch of Teslas, a lot of Rivians, a Lucid every, 1 in 1,000 cars or whatever, if that. So
Yeah.
Have out of curiosity, David, have you? I mean, Portland's not super rural in general. Like it's quite urban and suburban, but like North Carolina, I don't know about. I've never been to Houston, Shashi, but like in general, I know like North Carolina is a little bit more rural-y than Portland is. Like, what is the general attitude on something like a Cybertruck? If you've seen them around, reactions to that sort of
Yeah, that's a great question. I do see Cybertrucks fairly regularly. Like I would say once a week at minimum, I'm seeing a Cybertruck. It's very possible given the fact that like I have a fairly standard routine. I drive to the same places every day. It's possible that I'm
thing.
seeing the same Cybertruck, given that they're all stainless steel. It's kind of hard to differentiate, right? Unless they have a
Yeah.
matte, like a wrap on them, like you described earlier. So, yeah, unsure if I'm seeing the same Cybertruck a lot or different Cybertrucks. I'm certainly seeing different ones. But anyway. And so EVs are very prominent around Durham. Like they're very, like charging stations are relatively ubiquitous. There's obviously some on the campuses that most of the city centers have some version of free or low cost charging, mostly level 2, a couple of superchargers. Obviously there's Tesla superchargers around. So the EV sentiment in general is quite good. As you know, Lexi, because you've lived here as well, Durham's kind of a blue dot in a red, sea, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I do think that if you start to immediately leave Durham, especially if you start to immediately leave the research triangle, which is, Durham, Chapel Hill, and Raleigh, for those that maybe hearing this for the first time, the sentiment would probably change dramatically and probably, towards the negative. And so I do think you venture outside of those areas and the frequency of EVs in general would drop significantly, and kind of proclivity for charging stations and general sentiment of electric vehicles drops quite a lot. But I would say probably on an average day, something around 25% of vehicles that I see are electric, mostly Teslas.
Interesting. Interesting.
All right, speaking of politics, let's go to Polymarket. So the latest betting odds on the election are that Trump is likely to win. I will screen share the Polymarket and let you react.
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of lead. So just for those that are listening in North Carolina, we are also under early voting right now. So encourage everybody to go out and vote. But yeah, so this is a market that I look at regularly. The other market that I look at regularly is Nate Silver's 538. And the headlines for that one that you're not showing here, Shashi, is that Harris wins 53 times out of 100 and Trump wins 46 times out of 100. So just to kind of juxtapose, different markets predicting various outcomes. I think that in general, I think what is fairly obvious is that this election is going to be incredibly close and probably in all likelihood going to be contentious as we come down to the day. So I fully expect, even after voting closes, in about a month or so, that we probably won't know who wins the presidency for some time. And so I think that there's some interesting parallels there to previous elections and obviously the events of the past several years. But I do think my reaction to the polls are that generally speaking, I find that betting markets especially can be swayed by public sentiment, depending on if the betting markets are protecting their downsides of profits or loss. But alternative polls kind of have this thing calling in various directions. And then as a final thought, and then I'll pass over to Lakshay, broadly speaking, and there's been reports by the New York Times and others that polling data continues to see a decline in quality year over year. And people have speculated that's because of participation in polls. People will speculate because those polls can be flooded by bots or, people that want to see results skewed in a certain direction. And so in general, I do seek out polls like Polymarket or 538 that I believe have higher levels of accuracy, but any poll, depending on outcome and that kind of thing, I take with a pretty large grain of salt. I find these things very difficult to predict. So, Lakshay?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way as what Damon described. Like, I think polling it's an interesting intellectual exercise, and I think like 538 is the one that I've always like kind of known about. Like, it was the one I was kind of introduced to from the beginning. But I think like I know for myself is that like, and I know for people like around me my age, like any sort of like polling thing that comes in, whether that's like a text message trying to figure out like which way we're leaning, or whether it's like some more intelligent data scraping, like there's just much less participation in anything of that variety. I'm also like, again, like internet age, like when people want something when people have an opportunity to sway a thing away and they feel passionate about it, they will. So whether that's blue or red, like either side, there are plenty of opportunities to like organize to influence a result, I suppose. So I think like I do think this race will be quite close. I have my preferences on how this election goes, and I really hope we don't repeat some former mistakes. But that's just me. I think we can get as political as we want. In general, I hope things end up pretty blue. I think, but I also recognize that, like we've talked about before, where some of the economic policies coming out of the left, or proposed economic policies coming out of the left versus the right, like for example, innovation, like more globalized success, kind of gets stifled with some of the stuff coming out from the left versus the right. So there's quite large conversations to have there, I think, in general. But I am quite impressed it is this close in general.
Yeah, maybe as an idea for our next pod, we can do a pure political one if that's interesting.
Sure.
We can just kind of make a whole episode about that, because that'll be leading right into the election. My gut feel is that this election will come down to policy versus personality. The friends of mine who care deeply about personality and are offended by Trump's personality that is their driving decision-making criteria. Friends of mine who care deeply about policy and getting policy details vote for Trump because they think Harris doesn't have any ideas. And I side with the latter. I think Harris is largely a teleprompter. That's my view. I don't think she actually has her own ideas. And I think she's just happy to be where she is and riding along the wave, and hope she makes it to shore. And I think for Trump, like it or not, he's just very clear about what his policy objectives are. And so, kind of even his enemies, his detractors know exactly what he stands for as policy. And that for good or bad, he at least has a view. But that can tee us up for next episode for the ScholarAI politics episode.
I think that's great. I think one thing in closing here, I think the other interesting piece of this is that out of the three of us, I think I'm the only one that lives in an actual swing state. So in many ways, Lakshay, your opinions may be colored by your immediate surroundings, or at least even if they're not, it may be overwhelmed by the immediate surroundings. Similarly, Shashi in Texas, I don't know that you'll have much pull one way or the other depending on the vote. So that's an interesting tee up for next week. And again, thank you all for joining us for this week's episode of the ScholarAI Founders Pod. Remember to catch us on all of your typical podcast locations and find us on our YouTube channel. We will see you all next week. Thanks for watching.